Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. Welcome to the special seminar for lecturers and administrative staff at UWI on how to relate to persons with disabilities. I'm very pleased to be your chairperson today. My name is Shiva Gerson Robinson, and to have this opportunity to discuss matters of great importance with the disability community. Today, we'll have a panel of presenters that will discuss various matters on the Disabilities Act, reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities, facilities that's available for persons with disabilities on campus, and how to relate to persons with disabilities. So I do hope this seminar is fruitful and well received. So in true Jamaican fashion, we'll open with a word of prayer. Most righteous and eternal God, we want to thank you for the opportunity today to meet in this forum and to discuss matters for persons with disabilities and how to relate to these persons. Let the words and the knowledge be well received. Let what the presenters present today be useful. We thank you for the opportunity to meet in your son's name. Amen. So we will move on now to the welcome and opening remarks by Dr. Donovan Stanberry, Campus Registrar, UWI Mona. All right, I am not seeing Dr. Stanberry online. So.
Morning, colleagues. I just sent him the link. He was having some difficulty getting on.
No problem. Thanks for that update, Francesca.
You're
so
welcome.
We'll just allow a minute or two for Dr. Stanberry to join the meeting. Hi, good morning. Is Dr. Stanberry now with us? I'm still not seeing where he has joined.
All right, Ms. Gerson? Ms.
Yes,
Gerson?
Dr. Morris?
All right, just start in another 2 minutes. If he doesn't come on, then I will just bring welcome answer to the participants.
No problem. All right. So I'm not seeing where Dr. Stanberry has joined. So Mr. Morris, will you do the honors of bringing the welcome and opening remarks, after which we'll move straight into the overview. Dr. Morris?
Hello?
Yes, we're hearing you now. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. Pleasant good morning to all the participants who have registered and joined us in this very special training seminar that have been designed to expose and give lecturers and administrators at the University of the West Indies knowledge and understanding as to how to relate to persons with disabilities. Critical to the training and discussion. It's the Disabilities Act 2014 that has been passed by the government of Jamaica and has profound implications for educational institutions such as the University of the West Indies. And education and training institutions are mandated to ensure that mechanisms are put in place for the inclusion, participation, and non-discrimination of persons with disabilities. Consequently, the UWI is engaging in these seminars to expose and sensitize lecturers and administrative staff on how to relate with persons with disabilities. And so the training seminar is extremely important in building capacity, capacitating lecturers and administrators on how to relate to these individuals. And I must tell you, from the vantage point of the Center for Disability Studies, that we are treating this as a series, and we are going to be giving all the participants who complete 6 hours of the seminars a certificate. So we'll be coming back later on in the year with another series, early January rather, on how to relate with persons with disabilities as well, so that we can really get everybody on board with the training. So, you know, you will get a certificate at the end of that session. So we'll keep your details, and then we will follow up with you to make sure that you are at the next set of seminar. So we thank you very much for your time and coming out and sharing, and we ask and invite your full participation in the conversation. Thank you very much, Ms. Gerson Robbins.
And thank you, Dr. Morris, for bringing the welcome and opening remarks. So we'll move into the overview of the seminar. On February 14, 2022, the government of Jamaica brought into effect the long-past Disabilities Act of Jamaica. This legislation was approved in Parliament in 2014. The legislation seeks to protect persons with disabilities in the island against all forms of discrimination and to allow for their meaningful participation and inclusion in society on an equal basis with others. For clarity, persons with disabilities are regarded as any individual with a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment which may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis. There are 8 major categories of disabilities: blindness or visual impairment, deafness or hard of hearing, physical, mental, intellectual, speech, learning, and neurological. All of these disabilities impact on the functionality of the individuals with these types of impairments. The Disabilities Act of Jamaica makes it mandatory for education and training institutions to put in place measures to facilitate the participation, inclusion, and non-discrimination against persons with disabilities. Section 26 of the Act speaks to this. The University of the West Indies is the premier education institution in Jamaica, and as such, it must continue to lead by example. In this context, it must ensure that it continues to build on the foundation it has laid over the past 30 years to facilitate participation, inclusion, and non-discrimination against persons with disabilities. Over the past 30 years, the UWI has put in place varied measures to reasonably accommodate persons with disabilities, starting with the establishment of the Committee for Students with Disabilities in 1991. The institution has become the leading academic institution in terms of care and support for students with disabilities. This is evidenced by the creation of the Office for Special Student Services that caters to the needs of all students with disabilities. the establishment of a facility equipped with modern technologies to assist students with disabilities in their learning experiences. A large cadre of volunteers to assist students with disabilities on their examination accommodation. Additionally, the UWI has been progressively improving access to the physical plan to ensure that these individuals with physical disabilities can have greater access. Notwithstanding these efforts by the UWI Mona, significant work needs to be done to ensure that the institution is fully inclusive, an educational space, and an educational space. One area that needs urgent attention is that of the attitude of the members of staff towards persons with disabilities. Members of staff are social creatures and have been exposed to negative orientation towards persons with disabilities. The instant response is to be pitiful on persons with disabilities. This is an approach that is associated with the charity or medical model of disabilities. But we are now operating in the era of the social and rights-based model of disability. Resiliently, there must be a systematic shift in the institution in how persons with disabilities are treated and related to. Thus, the UWI Center for Disability Study, the entity established at UWI Mona to drive research, training, public education, and advocacy, is conducting these seminars on how to relate to students and staff with disabilities in a modern context. The Disabilities Act of Jamaica is now in effect, and all education and training institutions are required to implement measures which will redound to participation, inclusion, and non-discrimination against persons with disabilities. Being the premier academic institution in Jamaica and the institution that has proactively put in place measures to accommodate persons with disabilities, additional measures must be formulated to make UWI Mona more inclusive and participatory for students and employees with disability. It is for this reason that the UWICDS is conducting these training seminars to sensitize administrative staff and lecturers in how to relate to students and staff with disabilities. Please enjoy and appreciate the information that is being prepared by a distinguished panel, which have a tremendous knowledge of persons with disabilities. So we have 4 presenters today who is no stranger to the community of disabilities. Our first presenter today, Senator Dr. Floyd Morris. Senator Dr. Morris is an outstanding and distinguished member of the community of persons with disabilities in Jamaica. He is a member of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability and is the current director of the UWI Center for Disability Studies. Senator Dr. Morris will present on the Disabilities Act 2014 and the education, training, and employment of persons with disability. Mr. Morris, the floor is yours.
All right. Okay, so you are seeing and hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gerson Robinson, for your kind words of introduction. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all the participants to this special seminar again, designed to give greater insights on the legislation that has been formulated to protect the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities in Jamaica. This legislation was enacted in 2014 having gone through a long process of consultation starting from 2004 when I was the Minister of State in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. I was extremely committed then, as I am now, to ensuring that persons with disabilities are included, allowed to participate, and not discriminated against in the Jamaican society. This legislation will do that, and you are the ones who have to ensure that these goals are realized and persons with disabilities receive the benefits. The legislation is anchored in the human rights model of disability. Persons with disabilities under this model are viewed as rights holders and are therefore subject to all the fundamental rights and freedoms entrenched in diverse international human rights treaties. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that was signed and ratified by Jamaica in 2007 is the gold standard for this human rights model and is a feature of the Disabilities Act 2014. The objects of the Act are A, reinforce and promote the recognition and acceptance within Jamaica of the principle that a person with a disability has the same fundamental rights as any other person in Jamaica. B, promote individual dignity and individual autonomy, including the freedom of choice and independence of a person with a disability. C, ensure full and effective participation and inclusion in the society for persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. D, prevent or prohibit discrimination against a person with a disability and promote respect for differences and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. The legislation carries 11 parts and 51 sections. For the purpose of this presentation, we will not go through every single section. However, we will delve into the most essential features of the Act to show how it will benefit persons with disabilities and impact on others in the society. So, join with me for the next few minutes as I delineate the salient aspects of the legislation. We will finalize on some question and answers on how this legislation will transform and empower persons with disabilities. So please listen attentively, take notes, and ask questions. Section 2 of the Act, which deals with interpretation. This section deals with the diverse terms and concepts used in the Act. For the purpose of this presentation, I will focus on the definitions for discrimination, persons with disabilities, and reasonable accommodation. Discrimination means, according to the Act, any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of disability, which has the purpose or effect of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal basis with others of privileges, legal interests, rights, benefits, and treatments in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, religious, educational, or any other field, and include all forms of discrimination, including denial of reasonable arrangements. Persons with disabilities, or where the context requires, persons with a disability includes a person who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment with hinder the full or effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Reasonable arrangement means the necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments, not imposing a disproportionate or undue burden where needed in a particular case to ensure to a person with a disability the enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of privileges, interests, benefits, and treatment, and the facilitation of such privileges, interests, benefits, and treatments by the provision of auxiliary aids and services, including A, equipment or devices that alleviate the effects of a disability being experienced by a person. B, the acquisition of or modification of such equipment or devices. C, duly qualified interpreters, technologies, and effective methods that make an orally delivered and received material available to a person with a disability. And D, duly qualified readers, taped audiovisual, recorded text, or other effective methods of making visually delivered materials available to a person with a disability. It is extremely, and I must say to you that my very good friend and colleague at the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Professor Marcus Schiefer, will elaborate on the concept of reasonable accommodation. And I'm looking forward to that presentation by Professor Schiefer. It is extremely important that we learn and understand the terms and concepts. We have to be able to relate to them on a daily basis, and therefore, knowledge of them is foundational. Part 2 of the Act deals with the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Section 5 establishes the JCPD as a body corporate. What this means is that the organization will function as a statutory entity with its own seal. It will have the right to hire staff as it sees fit and to govern its proceeding. Importantly, it will have command over its own budget, and therefore services offered by the new entity should be more efficient. Currently, it takes over a year to get some benefits from the existing JCPD. This is because we have to go through the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to get things done. But under the new regime, this will change. And once the resources are available, then persons with disabilities should be able to get benefits quicker. Section 9 of the Act gives the authority of the Council to formulate codes of practice for the prevention of discrimination against persons with disabilities. It states the Council shall A, prepare codes of practice for guidance on matters under this Act, and B, review those codes of practice and where appropriate, make alterations thereto. And each such code of practice shall be laid on the table of each House of Parliament. And I will mention shortly two of the codes of practice that have been developed. Part 3 of the Act deals with the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. Specifically, Section 15 of the Act establishes the tribunal, which is called the Disability Rights Tribunal. This is a tribunal that will have the right to hear matters relating to the discrimination of persons with disabilities in Jamaica. Its constitution is set out in the 3rd schedule. The minister with responsibility for persons with disabilities has the authority to appoint the members of the tribunal. subject to the provisions set out in the Act. Section 16 gives the authority to a person with a disability to lodge a complaint to the JCPD if there is a perceived violation of the rights of an individual with disability. This can be done no later than 2 years after the occurrence of the violation. It must be noted that the complaint must be taken to the council for investigation to be done. The legislation requires that the JCPD must take action with regards to any complaints that is brought to it by a person with a disability or caregiver. Section 18(2) speaks to this. It states, 2, the council shall, with respect to a complaint made under section 16, A, refer the complaint to the tribunal for determination, or B, with the consent of the parties named in the complaint, refer the complaint for alternate dispute resolution. So they can either send it directly to the Disability Rights Tribunal, or they can send it to alternate dispute resolution. A person with disability can bring a matter to the court based on a decision made by the DRT. In this regard, the JCPD may give support to the person with disability as outlined in this section 22 of the Act. Part 4 of the Act deals with discrimination against persons with disabilities. Section 25 expressly states, a person with disability shall not, by reason of such disability, be subject to any form of discrimination. Part 5 of the Act, which covers sections 26 to 28, deals with the situation of education. Among other things, the Act frowns upon any practice of discrimination against persons with disabilities. In education, section 26 states, 1, an education or training institution shall not deny a person with a disability from being enrolled at or attending the institution by reason of their disability. 2, an educational or training institution shall provide the support necessary to ensure that in relation to the institution, a person with a disability, A, has the most reasonable access to the education or training provided, B, has access to facilities in the least restrictive environment and best suited to individual needs, C, being a student of the institution is not, in relation to student services provided, placed at a disadvantage, and D, is provided with reasonable arrangement and receives support required to effectively facilitate their education. And another section there states that each caregiver, as far as practicable, shall monitor the circumstances of persons with disabilities in their care in order to ensure that the person is not subject to discrimination, and B, where necessary, file a complaint with the council in relation to a person with a disability subject to discrimination. And section 3 of subsection 3 of 26 states that an educational institution shall have regard to the provision of any applicable code of practice issued by the council under section 9 and take reasonable steps to comply therewith. 4, For the purposes of this section, educational or training institution means a private institution or public institution which is engaged in the imparting of knowledge or skill. So the law is both applicable to private as well as public institutions. Part 6 of the Act, which covers section 29 to 31, deals with the issue of employment of persons with disabilities. The law frowns upon discrimination against persons with disabilities as manifested in sections 29 and 30. Section 31 is most significant in light of practices in the labor market. It deals with the situation of an employee developing a disability on the job and how it should be treated. It states where an employee has become disabled, whether by virtue of his employment or otherwise, and that employee is no longer capable of executing the task required by his contract of employment, insofar as there is no disproportionate or undue burden, the employer shall redeploy the employee to a position A, that is commensurate with the current skills and ability of the employee. B, does not result in loss and remuneration and benefits to the employee, rather, sorry about that. Part 11 deals with miscellaneous issues relating to the Act. This part of the Act ranges from sections 41 to 51. There are some sections that are of extreme importance to this seminar. Section 43 is one of them. Section 43 deals with circumstances where individuals are provided a service, but it is proving to be difficult to formulate the reasonable arrangement. In this regard, the Act makes provision for the government to assist as far as practical. Section 43 states, where a person is able to demonstrate to the satisfaction of any court or tribunal that the provision or services to in relation to a person with a disability, which, but for the provision of this section, would be required under this Act, would constitute a disproportionate or undue burden, the government shall facilitate, as far as is practicable, the needs of the person with a disability. The Act makes provision for penalties to be imposed against individuals who obstruct an authorized person or falsify information to the council. Section 44 of the Act speaks to this situation. It states a person who A, assaults or obstructs an authorized person in the performance of his lawful function under this Act, or B, knowingly gives false or misleading information to the council or any authorized person acting in the performance of his function pursuant to this Act, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction before a resident magistrate to a fine not exceeding $1 million or to imprisonment of a term not exceeding 6 months, or to both such fine and imprisonment. So there is penalty for violation. Similarly, the Act makes provision for penalties to be imposed on body corporates that violate any section of the Act. Section 45 of the Act deals with this. It states, a body corporate that commits an offense against this Act is liable on summary conviction before a resident magistrate court to a fine not exceeding $1 million to every director, manager, secretary, or other similar officer concerned with the offenses, library, and summary conviction before a resident magistrate to a fine not exceeding $500,000 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months or to both such fine and imprisonment. So the law makes sure that the company and the directors can be charged if they violate any section of the Disabilities Act. And you can be charged as directors up to 500,000, or you can be charged and be imprisoned based on the law. The Act in Section 46 makes provision for the minister to make regulations to give effect to the various provisions of the Act. These regulations must be affirmed by the Houses of Parliament. These regulations were tabled and adopted by the Parliament in 2021. Finally, the Act makes provision for a joint select committee of both Houses of Parliament to review its provision 3 years after coming into effect. So this review would be due in 2025, notwithstanding the passage of the law in 2014. I also want to take the opportunity to reiterate something that is very important to my presentation, and I alluded to it earlier about the codes of practice. There are three codes of practice that have been developed thus far by the government, and they are to be adopted by the board of the new JCPD and tabled in the Parliament. They are the Code of Practice on Education, the Code of Practice on Healthcare, and the Code of Practice for Employment. Now, these codes of practice have been designed to prevent discrimination against persons with disabilities. Because the reality is that for centuries, persons with disabilities have been subject to a particular way of treatment in society, and that has contributed to their marginalization. Now, what the law has done is to make provision for the establishment of codes of practice to help guide in the prevention of discrimination against persons with disabilities. And I must say that there are two unique features of the Jamaican legislation that is not present in any of the other legislation in other Caribbean jurisdictions. And I've looked at all other legislation in the different Caribbean countries. And the two provisions are related to the disabilities, the Disability Rights Tribunal, sorry about that, the Disability Rights Tribunal, DRT, which is going to be hearing violations when there are grievances as it relates to the rights of persons with disabilities, and the codes of practice, which have been formulated to help in the prevention of discrimination. And I dare say that if individuals should follow what is in the code, then it is highly unlikely that you will see discrimination taking place against persons with disabilities in the magnitude that it has been in the past. So we implore individuals to pay keen attention to the Act, to pay keen attention to the codes of practice to pay keen attention to the regulations of the legislation. And I stand ready to help my colleagues at the university. You are a fortunate bunch. You're a fortunate group, because I was very instrumental in developing the legislation and developing 2 of the codes of practices for persons with disabilities. And so I understand the legislation very well. And I'm prepared to guide and assist my colleagues as it relates to the legislation and the University of the West Indies. I thank you very much and make myself available for any question that you would want to ask.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Morris, for that well-received presentation. The floor will be open now for until 11:05 for question and answers if there should be any. We also welcome suggestions and feedback. So once you go ahead and raise your hand, we'll unmute your mic for you to ask your question, or you can pose it in the chat.
No question?
No, Dr. Morris, I'm not seeing any questions so far.
I am as clear as mud, as they would say in legal term.
Good morning, colleagues. I had my hand up, but I'm not being recognized.
Ms. Gerson?
I didn't
There's a
see
question
that
in the
hand.
chat.
Go ahead, go ahead.
And there's a
Shall-
question also in the chat.
Okay, Miss McPherson. So, Mr. Morris, Miss Shelley McFarlane has a question.
He's my friend, he's my big shot friend, you know. That I haven't seen for a long while.
Very, very long time.
All right.
But I just wondered, there's so many places in Jamaica right now that don't have the facilities for persons with disabilities. I mean, especially for wheelchair access. And I just wondered what was being done in that regard. Because I mean, yes, there may be penalties, but how can we try to enforce this? Because there's so new developments in the houses going up. And quite a few of them still don't have wheelchair access or access for persons with disabilities.
Yeah, it's a very good observation that you have made, Shelley, and the law anticipates that. In legal terms, and at the United Nations, we talk about progressive realization, meaning that we are not going to get up tomorrow and see all the facilities accessible for persons with disabilities, because I mean, we're coming from a period where the rights of persons with disabilities were not being recognized. So it's going to take some time, and that's why we talk about progressive realization. And the legislation, in fact, makes provision for that, because there is going to be a sort of 2-year grace period, whilst the law is in effect, you know, it makes provision for institutions, organizations, and individuals to make the necessary modification to their buildings and facilities so that they can accommodate persons with disabilities. But it's not going to be an accommodation that is going to be there for perpetuity, because, you know, this legislation has been long in coming and has been on the public agenda for a long time. And so people should be putting in place the necessary mechanism for this. So, you know, it's a very good observation. And the Building Act is also in effect, which is a sister legislation to the Disabilities Act. And the parish councils should be ensuring that all the building permits that are granted from 2018, all new buildings are supposed to be built with the requisite accessibility features, because the building code is inscribed in the Building Act and makes provision for persons with disabilities.
Okay, thanks for that. But I think we can earn some good money from some of these new developments, because if it said from 2018, I can tell you 3/4 of them don't have that facility. The new ones that just went out there.
Yes.
So yeah, we can earn some money from them.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I know that at UWI, there has been an established policy that all the new buildings going up should be accessible. So if any member sees a building going up and there are no accessible features, please notify me so that I can deal with whosoever is doing the construction. There's also a question in the chat, Ms. Gerson.
Yes, there is. I was waiting for you to complete your response.
All right. The question in the chat is from May Esther Robinson. Good morning. What will happen to a person with disability that is violating another person with a disability?
Well, if a person with a disability is discriminating another person with a disability, then the act is applicable to that situation, right? But if it is that it's a dispute between a person with a disability and another person with a disability, then it would be a matter of the regular legal proceedings tripping in, because it will be a personal dispute, and you know, then that is where the individuals would have to take it through the regular legal proceeding. But this legislation has to do with when a person with disabilities rights are being violated by an employer or any other individual in the society. And if those rights are being violated, then there's a process for redress. But if a person with a disability is violating a person with a disability within the realm of usual person-to-person dispute, then that is a matter for the regular court.
Okay. I am seeing where Miss Robinson or Mrs. Robinson, May Esther Robinson, had her hand raised. Is it in reference to the question that you posed in the chat, or is it a new question? Miss Robinson?
Ask her to unmute her microphone.
Yeah,
it was-
yeah, thank you.
It was in reference to what you posed in the chat. There's another question in the chat by Jason Ricketts. Realistically, do you think Jamaica, do you believe that we
Tell
will
Jason
see
to come on the mic and ask me the question.
Jason?
Morning.
Yes, Mr. Ricketts.
Yeah, I thought this occurred to me. I was just wondering if realistically, if we believe in our lifetime that all buildings would be made or can be made accessible to persons with disabilities in Jamaica, or it is a pipe dream.
Well, you know, Jason, it's a good question that you have asked. The thing is that I don't know if all buildings will be, because you have a lot of buildings coming out of that era when the charity and the medical model of disability was the dominant models driving public policy. And so much attention wasn't being placed to, for example, the schools that are built to be accessible. So you have 1,000 schools, primary and high schools, that have been built, and based on the data that we have and surveys that we have done, it's about 23 to 25% of them are accessible, right? Under the law, all of these buildings are to become accessible. As to whether it will, I can't say, but it is possible. What is going to require is the political will to drive that operation and to make sure that persons with disabilities have these buildings, are accessible to those buildings. It is possible, Jason, I will tell you that it is possible, but I don't know if there is the political will and the acceptance that this ought to be done. And you have to have somebody there in the system to constantly police the system and to make sure that the building code process is being followed at the local level.
Okay. Thank you so much for that response, Dr. Morris, and thanks to everyone who posed a question in the chat and who also unmuted their mics to ask questions. So we will be moving to our next presenter, Professor Marcus Schaefer. Professor Marcus Schaefer is one of the leading constitutional and disability law experts in the world. He is from Switzerland and a distinguished member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. He was recently elected. I apologize. He was recently re-elected to serve a second term on the special and significant UN body. Professor Schaefer will be presenting on the topic of reasonable accommodation. Professor Schaefer, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. Yesterday, there was a misunderstanding about my time slot, which led to the unfortunate situation that I had already another meeting scheduled. But at least today, it seems to be working. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about reasonable accommodation in the area of education and training. And I will address this issue from the perspective of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which had Jamaica was the first country to ratify it. And Jamaica, as you might be aware, was in the state party reporting procedure at our committee in the last session. So as I understand the situation here, I will make a presentation of about half an hour, which will then be followed by questions. I look very much forward to engage with you and answer your questions and get into a conversation with you. Now, in order to understand the importance of reasonable accommodation and the breadth of the concept, it is important to understand the breadth and of the convention itself. The convention itself is applicable to all persons with disabilities. I've heard you when I logged on talking about accessibility of buildings. Now, persons with who are in wheelchairs, who have motor disabilities, certainly fall under the convention, but that's not all. We have persons who are blind, persons who might be deaf or hard of hearing. We have persons with intellectual disabilities, and we have persons with psychosocial disabilities. All these people are covered and protected by the convention. That means when we talk about reasonable accommodation, we really have a very wide field of application, of a very wide field where this reasonable accommodation might come into play. And depending on the type of impairment that's at issue, reasonable accommodation might take on very different forms. So we will see later on in my presentation that depending on the type of impairment the person has, the kind of accommodation that is needed might differ enormously. So this is as a first general comment. Reasonable accommodation is intrinsically related to the concept of discrimination. The prohibition of discrimination is the main characteristic of the convention. The main normative content of the convention is geared toward a prohibition of discrimination based on disability. The convention aims at eradicating any type of discrimination and contains a right to that end, a right under Article 5 to not be discriminated against. Floyd Morris mentioned that some rights under the convention are open to, do not have to be directly implemented, but need to be implemented over time. The prohibition against discrimination is immediately applicable. That means that any person who is being discriminated against has a right under the convention to have that discrimination remedied immediately. Now, we all know that we are not in a situation right now where we can say confidently that we do not discriminate against any persons with disabilities. In many areas, I assume Jamaica is no different from Switzerland in this respect. We still bear the remnants of an understanding of discrimination that followed a charitable model, a medical model. Nevertheless, the prohibition of discrimination is immediately applicable. It is an autonomous right. It is an autonomous right, which means other than, for example, under the UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the prohibition against discrimination can be invoked without recourse to any other substantive right, just by itself. So, and getting closer to our issue, first, what does the convention mean by prohibition of discrimination? There are many different concepts in national and in international law, and the prohibition of discrimination under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has some very distinct differences as opposed to the prohibition of discrimination, for example, in the UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights or in other international treaties. And it is important that we understand these differences. The prohibition of discrimination is a very far-reaching concept. It is first not a merely formal prohibition, but it is a substantive prohibition, which means that it protects against laws that discriminate against persons with disabilities openly, but it also protects against laws that do not mention disability, but whose effect in their practical application is that persons with disabilities are treated worse than other persons. So we need to understand that the prohibition of discrimination, and I will get to it, reasonable accommodation, comes into play also in those areas, in those situations where the law itself does not mention disability at all. Simply the practical effects are what counts. Second, the prohibition of discrimination is applicable against national laws as well as individual actions by national authorities. So the legislator itself is bound by the prohibition against discrimination. If you look at your new law that came into effect, if I'm right, this February, you need still to ask yourself if that law really transforms the prohibition of discrimination in domestic law properly. A third aspect why it is a powerful concept. Under general international anti-discrimination law, you can always justify certain types of discrimination. If you have valid reasons and that led to that support a decision to treat a person worse than another person, those valid reasons within a proportionality analysis can, under general international law, justify worse treatment of certain groups of people. This is not the case under the convention, and this is the main difference that the convention erects against our other treaties. The disability cannot be used as in any way as a reason to treat somebody, a person with disabilities, worse than other persons. For example, if you have the situation that a person with disabilities cannot, because she's in a wheelchair, cannot access a building, financial reasons would not suffice to justify a general rule that would not allow her to enter certain buildings because of financial reasons. This is probably the starkest difference between our international treaty and the other international treaties and much of domestic laws as well. The convention specifically says that persons with disabilities need to be able to exercise their rights on an equal basis with others. If you read through the convention, you find this text time and again. And it is its purpose is to reassure and to clarify that what counts in the end is that persons with disabilities can, in fact, exercise their rights like any other people can. And this, now we're getting closer to reasonable accommodation. This then means that in a situation where government action is needed in order to ensure that a person with disabilities can exercise their rights, the prohibition against discrimination requires the government to take action. It does not just require the government not to actively discriminate, but also to take all those actions that are necessary in order to guarantee to any person with disabilities that she can exercise her rights like any other person could. So this is where we are focusing on government action. And there are two types of government action that the convention entails. There are specific measures and there are reasonable accommodation. Specific measures, they're not very aptly named, are those measures that the legislator needs to take in order, for example, to guarantee accessibility of buildings. You've talked about it. In your new law, you have the legislator has enacted provisions that require certain measures to be taken when buildings are constructed or renovated. So the government has taken action by enacting these laws. And this is one of the simple examples. There are many different types of legislation that the government must take in order to ensure that persons with disabilities can exercise their rights. When we go to the specific level, not to the level of the law, but to the individual person who wants to exercise her rights, then we get to reasonable accommodations. When a person with disabilities in an educational setting, a student with, I will for the time being stay with the wheelchair user, wants to access an educational building, wants to access a classroom and cannot do that. You need to ensure that the person is in fact able to do that. First, on the general level with specific measures by providing the necessary building codes and the changing the building. And if you have somebody who has maybe doesn't fit in the elevator or anything like that, you need to take specific measures that allows the person to enter. A hearing, a person who is hard of hearing, a student who is hard of hearing, must have the possibility to follow classes. That might, depending on the specific situation of the classroom, of the professor, of the person with disabilities, one needs to figure out which measures to take. Same thing with a person who might be blind. Which means reasonable accommodation needs a specific assessment of a concrete situation posed by a specific student or staff, whichever. And first thing is the authorities, the school, the university, must engage into a dialogue with the person. In our general comment on the anti-discrimination, the committee has laid this out. Must enter into a dialogue. Into a dialogue because one needs to find out what the specific needs of that particular person are. And then develop the necessary solution, which might necessary solution in dialogue with the applicant, with the specific student or staff member. Reasonable accommodation means, the reasonable of the accommodation term means this, the measures taken must be focused on the specific situation. They must also be effective, and they must conform to the needs of the specific person with disabilities. Now, the reasonableness part does not mean that is not there to restrict this right. The restriction comes later. The convention says that the reasonable accommodations must not be taken if they entail an undue burden, undue hardship on have a disproportionate impact on the provider of reasonable accommodations. So one needs to find out those measures that do not impose an undue hardship on the school, that are, for example, financially not liable. So there's a balancing test underway that needs to be taken. Now, I've talked about people with motor disabilities, blind people, deaf people. We also have in the area of education very often persons with psychosocial disabilities. For example, persons with autism. Persons with autism who would be perfectly capable of following our classes and writing our exams, but because of the kind of exam we have, they fail. This means that exams, and this is probably the area where we have most reasonable accommodation, the way we give the exams must, if necessary, be adapted to the specific needs, for example, of a person with autism. In some situations, you extend the time for a written exam. In other situations, you allow the person to write the exam on her own in a separate room, particularly for persons who cannot who because of the disability cannot concentrate in a room with maybe 100 other people writing the exam. So the exam area is one of those areas where we very often need to engage with persons with disabilities and find out what their specific needs for the exams are. The hardest and the most controversial type of reasonable accommodation comes in when we talk about changing the curriculum. An example with which I have worked, I've written a legal opinion on this, pertains to the medical education, education of medical doctors. In many countries, I don't know the situation in Jamaica, a person in a wheelchair cannot become a psychiatrist. Not because the person could not perfectly exercise the job of a psychiatrist, but because in the education of a psychiatrist in medical school, the person needs to perform surgery and other issues that she cannot if she's in a wheelchair. Here we talk about changing the curriculum as a form of reasonable accommodation. It is very controversial. At least the medical professionals that I've met are not very open to this. In the law area, the same thing. But we need to define here the core elements that an educational curriculum must contain. And we need to define those areas where we can, based on reasonable accommodation issues, change the curriculum. So this is quite difficult. We have in the committee, we have two quite prominent cases, or by now two prominent issues where we've dealt with reasonable accommodation. One pertains specifically to the education area. We've had in a case against Sweden the situation that a university was looking for a new professor of administrative law. The hiring committee, after extensive evaluations, recommended as the best candidate a deaf man, a man who was deaf and who was based on the hiring committee estimation, the best candidate. The university then halted the proceedings and decided not to pursue this avenue any further and not to hire that person. The reason that was given was that the sign language interpretation that this deaf person would have needed in order to interact with students would the cost of those sign language interpretation would roughly be the same as his annual income. So it would double the costs of this position. And they held that would be undue hardship on the university, and for that reason they did not pursue this opportunity any further. We in the committee looked at the case carefully, and we saw that never the university engaged with the applicant, with the deaf man, in order to find out what other possibilities there would have existed that would have accommodated him so that he could have exercised his job as a professor of administrative law without such extensive sign language interpretation. And because the university had not engaged into such a conversation, had not investigated whether there were other possibilities to accommodate the candidate, for that reason they violated the convention. So this issue, this case highlights the need to engage with the person and to come up with ideas about how maybe to change in our situation, in our case, maybe to lay a much more emphasis on the research part and less on the teaching part. They should have evaluated whether, based on the personnel they already had, it would have been possible to give him, to change his job description more toward research and less toward teaching and engaging with students, in order to reduce the sign language interpretation costs. So we need to really be flexible and do the utmost in order to accommodate people. Another case, or two other cases that our committee has decided on this pertain to Spain. It is not, they are not cases in the education area, but they pertain to police officers. In Spain, like in many other countries, a police officer had an accident at work, which as a consequence, the police officer could not, because of the disability that ensued of the accident, could not perform his functions as a police officer on the ground. Not simply for physical reasons, but also because of a traumatization against firearms, the accident involving the use of firearms by some criminals. The Spanish authorities decided to have that he would have a mandatory retirement, even though his retirement, he was still about 7 years from the mandatory retirement age. The committee decided that the authorities should have evaluated whether there would have been other jobs in the police service or in the administration that this police officer could have performed. In the police, as in any other administration, we have many positions that do not involve the use of firearms, that do not require people to be out there physically on the ground, but jobs that can be performed in offices that entail different types of work. As a reasonable accommodation, the Spanish police or the Catalan police authorities were under an obligation to evaluate whether within their jurisdiction, within the administration, they would have jobs that he could have performed as a form of reasonable accommodation. So to go back to education, we have adaptations in class. We have adaptations in the exams, and those are the most frequent, most important aspects. We usually have, and this is one more comment that I would like to make, we usually have at the beginning of a process a request by the student, by the staff member who requires reasonable accommodation. However, not all reasonable accommodation is dependent upon a request. We have certain types of impairment that lead people to not put in requests. All people might be somewhat hesitant to request reasonable accommodations because they would have to open up to the administration about their impairment. So if the administration, the school, the university has knowledge of a situation where a student ought to have reasonable accommodation, it needs to become effective on its, it needs to become active on its own. So I think I've used up my time. If I read correctly, I already see that there are questions in the chat. My question is now, should I just go on with answering the chat question, or is there a different type of procedure that you would prefer? Thank you.
Hi, Professor Schaefer. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you for observing the time limit. You can proceed to answer the questions in the chat. I see a hand raised as well, so I'm not sure which format you're most comfortable with, whether it's answering the questions in the chat first or the persons who have raised their hands.
So I'll just go on with the chat. Okay. You spoke about the fact that reasonable accommodations varies from disability to disability. Is a handbook that guides organizations, companies on things to take into consideration when determining reasonable accommodation for the various disability groups. That's a very, I think any organization is well advised if they, for their purposes, lay down or put in writing those situations that they can foresee and give tips about how to proceed. It is also important to set up a procedure that for example, that a professor in class knows who to contact if he sees or if she sees that there's a person with disabilities in need of reasonable accommodation, that the procedures are in place, that the competencies within the school administration are in place, and that you have a very specific guidance on the type of measures that might be taken. It is important, however, to clarify that the measures you put into such a handbooks are not exhaustive, because they're just the typical kind of measures that you can envisage. But in a specific case, you still need to be open to, if necessary, come up with a little bit of with a few ideas of how to best accommodate the person. And then, is it possible to have reasonable accommodation during learning process or class time? Absolutely. For example, when you we have students who write term papers, who need to do research for that. And if you are blind, for example, I've had a blind student, you are much slower doing research. And so what can be done, for example, you can appoint an assistant, pay that assistant a certain amount of hours to help the student do the research in order to accommodate the student to the situation and bring the student on the same, to allow the student to do that research within the time allotted. During class time, it might be a question of reasonable accommodation. The bulk of issues, however, pertains to accessibility. And accessibility in general is a general issue and not an individualized issue. So it is a specific measure and not a reasonable accommodation. It starts, for example, with accessible PowerPoint presentations. This is no big thing to do, but one needs to know how to do it. So it would make sense if an educational institution sets up a short, it doesn't have to be a handbook, a short explanatory note on how to create PowerPoint presentations that are accessible for persons with visual impairments. Or that you have as a very low-key reasonable accommodation that the seats in the first row are reserved for people who need to, or at least that any person who needs to be close to the professor in order, for example, to lip read, has a place in the first row. It's somewhat hypothetical, I think, because if students in Jamaica are the way they are in Switzerland, the first row usually is empty. But we need to have reasonable accommodation at all stages of an education, be it in the studying, learning phase, be it in class, be it in exams. It covers the whole range of what we do, because the purpose is, in the end, that persons with disabilities can exercise their right to education like other people. That nobody is being denied an education simply because of her disability. That is what the convention aspires, what it guarantees. And that is what reasonable accommodation are one important tool to achieve that goal. I don't see any hands up. Nope. And I don't see any anything else in the chat. Feel free to to ask questions or make comments, or if you do not agree, then tell me you do not agree. We are in an educational setting where dialogue is key and everybody can come up with their arguments. Floyd, I see your hand.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your excellent presentation. And, you know, the only thing left for me to do is to take you out of cold, cold Switzerland at that time of the year. It's very warm now, I understand. And take you to sunny and cool Jamaica. And we will work on that for next year. But I really appreciate your presentation, and the issue of reasonable accommodation is very important. And I was wondering if you could elaborate some more on when does reasonable accommodation start, and if there is an end point for it.
You mean on a time slide, or you mean when does it start, time-wise, or?
Yes, yes, yeah.
So, and basically it starts.
It's immediate when a person with a disability requests it.
When a person requests reasonable accommodation, the administration needs to become active. Particularly in an educational setting, time is important. If you you don't want to lose a semester simply because the administration takes 2 months to answer an email requesting reasonable accommodation. So time is important, and that's why we need to have positions in universities, in educational institutions that have the competence and the powers to deal with these issues, that are assigned to dealing with these issues, because we have many people with discrimination. Any society has roughly 20%. That's many, many more than we would usually assume we have. It's roughly 20%. Jamaica is no exception. I saw that in the State Party reporting procedure. And the reason why in our educational institutions we have many fewer than 20%. One of the reasons is that from very early on, persons with disabilities have a hard time getting the accommodations they need in order to exercise their right to education, to go to school and get an education. We have particularly, for example, persons with autism have for a very long time been excluded from an education simply because one did not realize that they needed accommodation. So it is important that you have a system in place that students know who to contact when they have a request, that the position that is being contacted has the knowledge and the powers to do something, and that staff does not react with negatively. We also see that sometimes that professors or other staff don't really want to deal with it. That is an issue that an educational institution must raise and raise awareness with staff about the needs of students with disabilities. When does it end? It ends when the measures have been taken, and hopefully the person has passed her finals. It is not something that you can address on a purely formal level. I've stressed the need to figure out what accommodation is needed in the specific case, and that entails a certain openness also for trial and error. If you come up with a solution together with the student, it doesn't work, well, don't just say we've tried it and that's it. Try to find alternative avenues that are successful. I have a question. Where can we get information on how to make our online journals accessible? There are international standards on online accessibility. These standards are set by a body whose members are states. And these standards, if they're followed, guarantee that online content is accessible for people with visual impairments. You of course then need the online readers, the JAWS, for example, the software that is needed to read the online content. But from the content side, follow the standards. That is the best what we can do up to now. In some cases, the lecturers may not understand what it means by reasonable accommodation. Yes, I think this is not something people who do not think about persons with disabilities very often, and that is probably most people, do not know what it is, reasonable accommodations. It must not be the duty of each individual lecturers to come up with the ideas necessary. And you cannot leave your lecturers alone with this issue. You need to have somebody in the administration who is in charge of this issue, who knows what to do, who's studied the issues, and where lecturers can turn to and get suggestions or help. It will not work if lecturers are left on their own, just being told, well, do reasonable accommodations. That's a recipe for failure. And about rainy Switzerland, right now we have a hot streak. It's every day it's about 30 degrees centigrade. It's very dry, which is bad for for vegetation. But the weather, I think, is quite nice and hot at the moment. But in the winter, it's miserable and cold and rain. Are there any, please tell me about the time frame. I think I'm getting up there. I'm not quite sure how long.
No, you're within reasonable time. But there was a question in the chat. I'm not sure if you already addressed it, from Heather Monroe, asking, where can we get information on how to make our online journals accessible?
That's what I meant with the international standards.
Okay.
You have international standards that tell you how to go about making online content, and online journals are a subgroup of online content to make them accessible. Oops, now I need to. I'm just looking for on my computer. Maybe I can give you the bit more specific more specific information. We've just announced a conference on those standards. I'm just looking up I can't find it, but I can send you the link to the to the organization that sets these standards, and there you will then be able to go forward.
Okay, thank you so much for that information, Professor Schaefer. So I'm sure we enjoyed his presentation. I'm sure we enjoyed how he engaged us as the participants in our questions and answers. We will move on to our next presenter, who is just as able, Mrs. Sharmali Cardoza Camarero. She's an outstanding member of the community of persons with disabilities in Jamaica. She currently serves as the administrator at the Office for Special Student Services. She has occupied this post for close to 8 years, and she will be presenting on the services that are available at UWI Mona for students with disabilities.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Am I allowed to screen share?
Yes, you have been given privilege to screen share, so you may proceed.
Okay. Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Confirmed.
Thanks. Good morning. Is it still morning?
Yes, it is. It's 11:53.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. I am Sharmali Cardoza Camara, the administrative assistant at the Office for Special Student Services. It is my honor to inform you of the services that currently exist at the UWI Mona campus. The Office for Special Student Services came about due to the advocacy, hard work, and determination of individuals on the Mona campus. These individuals saw persons with disabilities being given entry into the university, but little was done to accommodate them. And so with the hard work, advocacy, and determination, the Office for Special Student Services came about. Individuals such as Professor Mark Figueroa and Dr. Mark Witter, along with many other pioneers, saw these students entering their classrooms, and little was done except for allowing them examination accommodations. And so these individuals, along with many others, decided that they must engage the wider university population to ensure that the needs of these students with special needs are met. Out of this came the Committee for Students with Special Needs, who have been around since the early 1990s. This committee comprised of individuals, stakeholders from the different departments, the different units on campus. And these individuals drove the work that currently exists now at the Special Students Office. Who are we? The Office for Special Student Services is a unit under the Office of Student Services and Development. The Office for Special Student Services caters to the needs of students with special needs who are registered on the UWI Mona campus. Currently, we register 39 students with special needs in the academic year 2021-2022, with 13 of those students in the Faculty of Social Sciences. We cater to students with permanent and temporary disabilities. Permanent disabilities include blind and visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing, various learning challenges, and physical challenges. We also cater to students with temporary needs, such as injury to limb, spine, pink eye, chickenpox, heavily pregnant, anxiety, just to name a few. This means that during our examination period, the office becomes very busy because the students with temporary disabilities are being accommodated in this space. Students are always advised, and just to let you know that I would encourage you in your little space to encourage these students, because sometimes during the examination period, students do not know how they're going to complete their course of study because they have an injury or some situation that is going on with them, which will not allow them to do their, or they feel that it will not allow them to do their examinations. They can touch bases with the Office for Special Student Services, the examination section, as well as the health center, so that the necessary accommodations can be made for them to complete their exam in the given period. So we do cater to students with temporary disabilities. And I do stress that point because I know sometimes there are students out there who have just one course to complete, and because of whatever injury or situation, they have to wait until the next resit to do their examination. We are not always the experts in these, with these different situations that may pop up, but we do our best to accommodate our students all year round. The registration, right, so I now move to the registration process. Once a student receives acceptance from the university, this list is generated with all the students who would have indicated on their applications that they have a special need. The Office for Special Student Services reach out to these students and verify that they have a special need. Once they indicate that they do have a special need, we inform them of the steps taken to be registered with the Special Students Office. The student must present a medical report from a specialist. This report is sent to the University Health Center for final verification. Once the health center approves this medical report, the student meets with the administrator at the Special Students Office to work out the unique accommodation for that specific student. Even though we have general accommodations that we provide, we speak with the student on one-on-one basis so that that student can receive the specific accommodation suited to their need. I am now going to move into the services, some of the services we provide. And I'll start with the interpretation, the provision of interpreters for our students who are deaf and hard of hearing. So in the late, I think it was around 2015, 2016, the university accepted our student, well, during my time, the first student who is deaf and would require who would require an interpreter for her classes. Now, this was something we did not prepare for, because some things in life you do not prepare for, but when they are thrown at you, you just have to jump in and do what you have to do. And so this student she requested interpretation services for her classes, and this was granted to her. She graduated from the Institute of Gender and Development Studies with her first degree. Presently, we have a deaf student in the program, in the social work program, and she's doing well. So we do, as I think this would fall under reasonable accommodation, we do provide this service so that the student is able to perform at her maximum. We also provide orientation services to students with special needs on the campus. So once a student comes to the Special Students Office, depending on the nature of their special need, we show them different routes to different venues on the campus, because a physically challenged student would use a slightly different route from a person who is blind. And so we try to get them familiar with the different routes to their specific faculties, you know, food places, halls of residence, so that they're able to manage on their own. We also act as the mediator between the students with special needs and the wider campus community. This means that we communicate with the different halls of residence, the different departments, different units, basically just anyone who the students would have to come in contact with. And so one of the things we do is, as soon as a student is registered for his or her courses during the semester, we send a letter to the lecturers and the tutors informing them of the registration of that student in their particular course. This process continues throughout the semester. And I might pause to say that sometimes as lecturers and tutors, you get the letters very late. And it's no fault of ours, it's just that the students provide their lecturers information at different times. They register for courses, they drop courses. And so this is something at the Office for Special Student Services we're trying to work on to have a smoother process, and so that lecturers can be informed ahead of time and not just wait until the 5th week or the 6th week of the course to know that they have a student in their class. It can be very irritating. And so we continue to encourage our students to provide these information in a timely manner. Another thing that a good thing that came out of COVID is that we were able to deliver these lectures via email, because before COVID, we would walk to each department and drop off these lectures in the lecturers' boxes. But with the advent of COVID, we were able now to deliver these letters via the lecturer's email. I know sometimes it's a bit challenging for us, because when we deliver these letters, some of the lecturers, your mailbox are full, and so you might not have gotten the message in a timely manner. And so we just encourage you to work with us. And I received a recommendation yesterday about having the students drop off the letters, which I will definitely look into as another means of speeding up the process. We also work alongside the different departments to ensure that classes that are on the higher level floor are relocated to the ground floor to facilitate students with physical disabilities. It doesn't mean that all the classes on the ground floor are accessible, but we do work together to make ramps and portable ramps that we can put at the different classes so that students are able to access it. And I must say that I really want to say thanks to all the departments, all the faculties that we have worked with since 2011. I've been in this post since 2011, over 10 years, and we have had a very good working relationship, and I know that we'll continue to have that. We also provide student volunteers to assist our students in and out of the office space and around campus. Student volunteers come from the different clubs and societies which exist on campus, students who have scholarship hours to complete. We have a very good working relationship with the University of Technology in their community service program, where students have to complete 40 hours of community service. And so we continue to welcome our volunteers to assist our students. And you don't have to be a student to be a volunteer. Staff, family members, we go as far as taking students at a high school level to complete community service, because we know that some high schools do require students to complete community service. It has been, so you might see students come into class with individuals that are not registered in the course. These are students who are assisting them with note-taking and just helping them to navigate the wider campus space. We also provide academic support for our students, and the academic The Academic Support Unit operates out of the Office of Student Services and Development. The Academic Support Unit provide assistance with math-based courses such as economics, accounts, and English-based courses. So, you know, the foundation courses. And so we continue to have that working relationship with the Academic Support Unit. Our students are privileged to receive one-on-one tutorial services from the Academic Support Unit. And so our students are able to do very well in these math-based courses. We do have challenges, but we do work through them. And so that's as it relates to the Academic Support Unit. Technology and other aids. The Office for Special Student Services is equipped with computers that have the speech software, which is the job access with speech. And fortunately, the university was able to purchase these software, and which are now on all the devices at the Special Students Office. Students are able to use these computers to do their assignment, to work with volunteers, to access information, to do their research. Additionally, I would like to take this time to say commendations to Dr. Floyd Morris. He had implemented a project, and this project saw all our students with special needs, once they're registered with the office, receiving personal laptop computers, which further aided in their maximization of their courses. This project was not only limited to students with special needs, but it was also a project for persons with disabilities who were employed. And so I am a proud beneficiary of one of those laptop computers, which is doing me well up to today. Examination accommodation. The Office for Special Student Services work closely with the examination section to provide examination accommodation for students with special needs. Our office is equipped with rooms that allow our students to comfortably do their examinations. We also provide scribes and invigilators to oversee the examination process. These scribes and invigilators are vetted by the examination section and must meet the criteria of completing a first degree. So we normally use students in the master's programs to invigilate our student with special needs. This also is a very good initiative, because in other institutions, persons have to be scrambling for assistance when it comes out to the examination period. Our students don't have to worry about that. It is all on our shoulders to take care of that so that they have a wonderful examination period. We also provide computers for students who would like to type their examinations. And these computers are also vetted by the examination section. Students with special needs are also given additional time to complete their examination. Scholarships and grants. The Office of Student Financing continue to inform the Office for Special Student Services of different scholarships and grants that exist for students with special needs. And these scholarships and grants, these notifications are sent to our students. Presently, this list is not all that is there, but we do have the Lions Club of Mona, the Keith Pearce Scholarship. We have the UWICDS Scholarship. We have Digital Foundation, and Dr. Floyd Morris, out of his kind gesture, have a book grant that he offers to students in the Faculty of Social Sciences each year who has the highest GPA. And so we must say thank you, Dr. Morris, for that. Outside of the university, we have the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities that provides a Margaret Moody Scholarship for students pursuing tertiary education. Also, the Jamaica Society for the Blind, Marlon King Scholarship for students with special needs, and the Jamaica Society for the Blind Scholarship. Dr. Morris would have mentioned the Disabilities Act and the different segments that relates to educational institution. If we should look at the University of the West Indies, the first thing here is that students should not be denied entry to the university because of their disability. And we can proudly say that to date, all our students with special needs were accepted based on their academic qualifications and not based on their special needs. As we further look at another aspect of the act that deals with the service delivery and support for our students, we still have some way to go, but we must say that we try our best to ensure that our students receive the support, the necessary support to pursue their degrees. And where we are not able to give it to them directly, we put them in, we refer them to different organizations or different individuals that are able to assist them. We still have work to go, but I must commend the campus for really and truly supporting our students with disabilities. Before I conclude, I must say that the Office for Special Student Services continue to support our students with special needs in whichever way we can. And as the premier institution, I'd like to thank the University of the West Indies for making that bold step to ensure that our students with special needs are granted the opportunity to receive their education. As I conclude, I'd like to say, let us continue to work to ensure that our students with special needs receive the education needed to live, work, raise family, and do business in Jamaica. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Mrs. Camara, for your presentation. We will now move into the questions and answer. If there are any questions, suggestions, feedback from the participants for Mrs. Shamali Cardozo Camarero, you can either type them in the chat or raise your hand. So, all right, I am seeing a comment to say, you go girl, Mrs. Shamali Camarero, you're doing well. I too remember the day I used to read and or type for Ricardo Bruce. Those were fun days bonding with these students. I learned so much. My experience with the blind began in the main library, use of Java on the computers in that section designated for students with special needs. I worked for the blind until the Office of Special Student Services was relocated and now erected in the lovely multifaceted building it is today. So that was just a comment. So kudos to you, Shamali, and the work that you are doing. So we are still posing. Okay, Dr. Morris, you may go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Cameron, excellent presentation as usual. Very proud of you as my colleague and partner in crime at the office there. And, you know, continue to grow and continue to shine. Tell us, Mrs. Cameron, because the services are there for guidance for lecturers and and administrators on how to deal with students and also employees with disabilities. Have you found lecturers across the board utilizing the services consistently? Do they consult regularly on issues relating to students with disabilities? You find the lecturers utilizing the services of the Office for Student Service regularly?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Morris. So I must say that lecturers, departments, and tutors, they have reached out to the office. If there's something that they're not clear on, they would reach out to the office for guidance, for assistance. But I don't know if it's a case where my introductory letters are clear enough. So most times they basically tell the lecturers exactly what the special accommodations are for each student, or they've been around so long that, they become used to having these students in their classes. And so sometimes they don't reach out. But I must say that right across the board, all faculties are very cooperative. And if there's something that they're not clear about, they definitely reach out. And I would encourage them to reach out as often as they can. It's no bother. We all are a team and we just have to work together to achieve the dream.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question. Ms. Gamera?
Yes, Dr. Morris.
Another question that I would like to ask you. From your knowledge and awareness of the disability landscape, do we have any matching or similar facility to what we have at UWI at any other university or tertiary institution in the country?
No, Dr. Morris. The University of the West Indies, Mona, is the only facility that is developed, like an actual formal facility that is developed for students with special needs. And so we must say congratulations to the UWI Mona for making that big step in ensuring that our students have this comfortable space to come to whenever they have a need.
And finally, do you find other students with disabilities, other campuses coming to utilize our facility from time to time?
Most definitely. Since the early 1990s, I think the university, not being a selfish institution, the Office for Special Student Services have been very accommodating of students as far as the high school level. So we've been assisting students with special needs were able to come to our offices and benefit from our voluntary services from the high school level, from other tertiary institutions. And we have been very accommodating.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I am checking in the chat if there are any additional questions. Just two comments. One from May Esther Robinson, Miss Cardoza Camarera, thank you for your kindness you have extended to me at OSS. And from Nicole Johnson, very informative presentation. Mrs. Cardoza Camarera, happy to be a part of an organization that places emphasis on making the UWI experience an excellent and accommodating one for our students with disability, #OneUWI. Okay, so if we have no more comments, questions, feedback for Ms. Camarera.
One question.
Go ahead, Jason.
Shavin.
Oh, hi, Shavin. Because
Hi,
you're
good evening,
using
everyone.
Jason Zoom. Okay.
Yes, I'm using Jason Zoom. Okay. All right. So I have a question for Ms. Cameron. In terms of the usage of the office for special student services, what else do you think we can do to see more students with disability using the office outside of blind and visually impaired? Because you know, majority of us is blind and visually impaired person who use the office. So even for those with disability that you would say are invisible or otherwise, what do you think we can do to see it ramp up the usage of the office? And maybe because of that now, we'll get more, I guess, more opportunity coming into the office, so to speak.
Very good question, Mr. Daly. So one of the things we have to take into consideration is the need of the person with a disability. So the person who is blind and visually impaired may have a greater need to use the space because of the services we provide. A person with a learning challenge does not necessarily need like volunteers to assist them to classes or persons to help them type up notes or so. And so you might find that we are the persons that use the office more. But I think one of the things we need to take into consideration is that we need to be more out there in terms of sensitizing the wider campus of us, because there are always instances where you hear that, I didn't know that the office exists. I didn't know that such, you know, I could get this, I could get that. And so one of the things I'm looking into for this new academic year, especially with the whole face-to-face, for students coming back face-to-face, I think I need to sit down and really come up with some, even if a 5-minute gig at each faculty orientation, each department orientation, just to say, hey, we're here, these are the services we provide. It don't have to be anything long and drawn out, but I'm really looking into trying to tap into these orientation, tap into the clubs and societies, tap into the halls of residence, just to let students know that you can come to our office. We can provide, we provide this, we provide that. And so I'm hoping that that's one of the ventures that could help us to grow in numbers and have other students with special needs utilizing the services. Sensitization is a big thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Shamali. Any other questions, comments, or feedback? All right. So without any further ado, we will move into our next presenter, Miss Gloria Goff. Miss Gloria Goff is a prominent and distinguished member of the community of persons with disabilities in Jamaica. She currently serves as the Executive Director of the Combined Disability Association. She has a wide array of experiences on the subject of disability and is one of the leading advocates in the Caribbean on the subject. Ms. Goff will present on how to relate to students and employees with disabilities.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back again to speak to another group of persons. And you have heard from others before, so I'm just going to give you the section on how to interact with persons with disabilities. As you will notice, the topic of my presentation says, knowledge is key in interacting with persons with disabilities. And we're going to be looking at trying to achieve 3 objectives, major objectives, that you will have a better understanding of interacting with persons with disabilities, that you will be more responsive to persons with disabilities, and that you will be more knowledgeable about sighted guiding techniques. And when we get to the sighted guiding techniques, you will understand why I specifically put that as an objective. Now, we're going to be focusing on 3 major disability areas, major disabilities We're going to be focusing on deafness or hard of hearing or hearing impairment. And we're going to be looking at persons with physical disabilities. And then we're going to be looking at persons who are blind.
No, me in our training, that's why.
Chevelle, we're looking at also persons who are blind and low vision or hear or sight impaired. All right, visually impaired. Because there are different terms that are used. So now we're going to go straight to hearing impairment or hard of hearing. And you know, hard of hearing are those persons who can hear a little, right? So they might lose the hearing in one ear or a little, some of the hearing in both ears, right? And the deaf persons are those who have completely lost the ability to hear. So how do we as students, as workers, you know, as lecturers, interact with deaf persons? Take a moment to identify any visible clues they use to communicate, you know? Then find out if the person is able to speak with you. And when I speak with you, they might be able to sign if you are able to sign, or they might be able to write to you and you write back, or whatever limited improvised signs they are able to use. But if you don't know any of the signs, don't try it, because what you try might be telling them something totally opposite to what you really want to say. If you're in a public area, you know, with many distractions, consider moving to a quieter place to speak with a person who is deaf, or even persons who are hard of hearing or persons who are deaf, because the distractions can affect how you communicate with them. Observe the signs used. You know, they are very physical. You know, the eyes, they use their hands, the body language, the facial expressions, all of those things communicate something. It's part of the language. And so therefore, you need to understand that if they're talking to you and a frown cross your brow or something like that, they might interpret that you might be annoyed. So body language for them is important. Observe how they indicate yes or no, because generally, if they are pointing to something or like asking you if that's the way they should go, but you might not know the words, but because they're pointing to, you might be able to say, if you notice how they say yes, whether they nod or whether they make a fist and move it as if to say they are bowing their heads, then you will know that that is yes. So practice yes and no is critical, because sometimes in conversing with them, that's what you want to know, yes or no. Use close-ended words. So, are you going to the shop? Are you going to the tuck shop? Are you going to class? You know, so that will help them in communicating with you, because you might be able to point towards the thing or use some other sign, maybe even a sign located on the campus that will indicate to them what you're trying to say. Ask questions one at a time and speak slowly. Look directly at the person so that he or she can easily read your lips. But keep in mind that not all deaf persons are lip readers. Some people are good at it, but some persons cannot lip read. And sometimes too, the way we pronounce words can make a difference into how they lip read. And the accent as well makes a difference. Because as I said yesterday, the person in Jamaica might say one, and somebody from Europe might say one. And therefore, one might be interpreted in a different way. So it's best to make sure that learn sign language, or if you don't know it, write or seek help in communicating with a person, right? ask the individual to repeat what they said. That is because remember, some deaf person can actually speak orally, you know. They can actually talk because they used to speak before and they learned the language. They have this speech, but they just are not able to hear. So some can speak. So if you're not clear, sometimes this speech comes out a little garbled. So if you cannot hear what they're saying, ask them to repeat and repeat slowly. Get their attention by clapping. So if you're in a class and the person might be looking elsewhere, or you're working with them, or you're walking on the campus and you want to get their attention, you can clap, you know, because sharp sound sometimes penetrate the eardrum and get to the point in the ear that will allow them to know that some vibration, something is happening. So you can clap, or you can stomp your foot on the floor, especially if the floor is wooden, right? The vibrations will let them look around. If they're looking in your direction, you can wave, yeah? But suppose you're walking on the campus or you're walking in a classroom and the person is ahead of you and you want to get their attention. And then you can always, but you can't get to them fast enough. An oncoming person, somebody coming towards the deaf person or towards you, you can just shout to them and say, touch that guy for me or touch that lady for me. But you have to say where, on the arm or the shoulder, right? And if you're walking behind the person, you cannot walk and touch them in the back or the head because they don't hear what's happening behind them, and somebody touching them, especially if you touch them hard, they might become aggressive because I think they are being attacked, right? Body language, I said before, and the environment in which they are helps. Eye contact, proper facial expression, proper lighting, because they rely on their sight so much, right? With the recognition of a hard of hearing student, and you're speaking with them, whether in class, during lecture, or just having a conversation, you can elevate or project your voice. There's no need to shout, because especially if they have hearing aid and you shout, it can say, cause what you're saying to be distorted because it creates a vibration. Now, we're going to move to physical disability. And you know, of course, that means somebody who has some problem with mobility, maybe lost an arm as well, or both arms, are not able to walk or use a wheelchair, or not able to stand for long or sit for long. So that's what it refers to somebody who has a physical condition that limits his or her mobility. Or people with motor impairment may use wheelchair, they may use walkers, they may use cane, crutches, or they might simply just have problem walking long distance. Let's look at the key points. The wheelchair is part of the user's personal space. Do not lean on it or on any assistive device. And we say that because the person might be in a wheelchair and they have stopped to converse or to look at something in close by a wheelchair. You lean on it and maybe your weight causes the wheelchair to move, or maybe the lock has gone slack and the wheelchair moved. That wheelchair can tilt and hurt you and the user of the wheelchair, and we don't want that. If talking with a wheelchair user, you do not have to stoop. Place your, eye at yourself at eye level where the person can be looking at you, you looking at them. Or if there's a seat, if the person is the wheelchair is stationary and there is a seat, you can sit beside the person and have a conversation. There's no need to stoop, right? Just simply make eye contact and converse. Never patronize a wheelchair user, right? By patting them on the head or shoulder, like you're talking, and because they're sitting and you might be standing, they're below you. Want to bend the hand, to shake the hand or whatever, you pat them on the shoulder. Actually, if it's your friend, that works and they're comfortable, but somebody who you're not very comfortable with, or well, I should say not very familiar with, you shouldn't take that approach. Never push a person's wheelchair without his or her permission, right? Because sometimes the wheelchair might be somewhere and you want to pass and you just push the wheelchair out of the way. It's the person feel disrespected. That's the first thing. You just do what you normally do with anybody. Say, excuse me, because quite often the person can manipulate the wheelchair themselves. Ensure clear paths for travel of the wheelchair. So if you're in a group, for example, or, you know, sitting down, chatting, or you're going to be studying or dealing with an assignment, or the teacher is creating some formation, there must be clear paths for wheelchair to travel. So they're going to need more space than the average student. Offer assistance if the individual appears to be having a difficulty opening a door. So the student is leaving class and the door was closed and the student is very independent and you have come to recognize that. They still might have challenges with heavy doors and you're in a wheelchair if you have to pull or push it. So, but don't just walk up and pull the door for them. Just, can I assist? Because some persons really feel like it's best to ask them. It's always best to ask if they need the help. Maintain the same space. Case if you're walking with a person with a physical disability. So you're walking and the person uses crutches. Don't just walk fast and then stop part way and wait for the person to catch up and then walk away again. Just keep an even pace with the person. We all can slow down if we have to. Offer to shake hands if the right hand of the person is missing. Because sometimes we grow up with this cultural understanding and this, you know, how to etiquette that we shake hands and we shake right hand to right hand. But some persons do not have a right hand because of various reasons. But sometimes when people put out their hands to shake and realize that the right hand is missing, they pull back and look embarrassed. No, you shake the left hand. That's the hand that is available to be shaken. So shake the left hand. So for persons who have physical disability, you know that if you're having some event and they might have to leave early because some person cannot sit for long. If you're in a line, it would be good if you put that person in front of you because some person cannot stand for long. It's not because you're sorry for them, it's the reality, right? So now we move to blindness or visual impairment, sometimes referred to also as low vision. And of course, blindness refers to visual acuity of 20/200. And that what you can see at 200 feet, I might have to see at 20 feet or less. So the rest of the description of that is on the screen. And visual impairment, on the other hand, simply means that you can see a little. You can actually identify colors. And if the person is close enough to you, you might be able to describe the features, right? And the person with who is blind uses a white cane for mobility, for being able to move independently, while the person who is visually impaired often does not use a cane. Some of them do because they use it when they're crossing a road. And of course, you will see a picture there with somebody walking with a white cane, right? Let's look at the key points. Upon meeting a blind person, identify yourself. If you have met before, remind him or her of the context, because this person will not have the visual clues to jog their memory. So for example, you meet a student on the campus or somebody's working with you, but you're meeting them for the first time. I am Joy Cruikshank. I work or I'm a lecturer or a tutor. The next time you meet them and you say it again, the voice may stick in their memory, but maybe not the name. So they might look a little, you know, so you repeat it. So they will remember you the next time around. And they won't be able to say, oh, the lady who just called to me is a lady in a blue dress, right? So when, or you're tall and slim and all those visual clues that other people depend on. Speak directly to the individual when you approach him or her. State clearly who you are. speak in a normal tone of voice and don't disguise your voice and ask them to guess. This can be frustrating. There are some persons who meet you and they will change if it's a female, they change the voice to what should be sounding like a male or vice versa. Or they touch you, pinch you, pull your hair, and for you to guess, especially somebody who you know very well and they feel that you might understand some of the antics they get up to. But we don't really like that. Yeah, it can be frustrating, and especially when you do it in public around other people and you're guessing and you're pushing out your hand to find out who is touching you. It's kind of undignified. If you know the person well enough and you know they don't mind, because sometimes you're in the same hall, on the same hall, share the same room or next, but as a practice, this is what you're not supposed to do. When conversing in a group, identify yourself and the person with whom you are speaking. So for example, all of us are gathered on the hall or gathered in the classroom and we are speaking, but I am there. And as a blind person, you might be posing a question to me, but I don't know that it's me. Or you might not be talking to me and I assume that the question is posed at me because I know the answer. It's good to say, call the person's name if you know. And if you don't know the person's name, you might be able to touch the person's arm to get their attention. That's right. Be descriptive, of course, in terms of activities and the surroundings in which you're with the person, right? When giving directions, for example, if you're approaching steps or stairs or crossing the road, you need to be descriptive. Say to the person, you have this big step down, as we say in Jamaica, of the sidewalk, or you have some narrow steps coming up and, that sort of thing. We also do not assume that an assistant is a relative or a friend, because sometimes somebody is just assisting you from point A to point B and somebody will say, what is it she needs?
Hi, Gloria. Gloria. Gloria, are you still on the call? Let me check. I am seeing her on the call, but her camera and audio went. Her camera went black and audio went. Okay, I'm seeing where she disappeared. Sorry, so give me a moment, participant. Just give me about a minute or two for me to get back Miss Cuff on this call. Hi, Gloria. Video is back, but you're muted. Can you unmute?
I'm unmuted, but I'm not sure because the JAWS is done.
We're hearing you now.
You're hearing me now. All right. What was the last thing you heard?
Last thing we heard, you were giving key points to speak about whether or not we're assuming whether an assistant is a relative or a friend, and do not take the blind person's cane. You were along that line of discussion.
Great. Do not take the blind person's cane, right? So you didn't miss much then. The next thing is tell the individual when you're leaving. So if you're walking with the person or standing and talking, don't just walk away, because you leave the person talking to themselves. So it's best to tell them that you're leaving. And that's manners, even when you're talking with somebody who is not blind. Ensure that during a lecture, if you are teaching and there are tables on this on the board or on the screen, what you're projecting, ensure that you describe it very graphically for the person. You have to say, instead of saying this number coincides with the number in column 5 in the brackets, no, you have to say it for the person who is blind. In row 1, in column whatever, the number 250 is to be subtracted from column 5, 625. You know, you have to be specific. If the person is not coping, it's best to assist them in getting support. And I know that Mrs. Camera spoke about the kind of help that can be provided by the Office of Special Student Services. Be descriptive in terms of graphs, photographs. You know, you have to actually be, you're showing somebody doing something, you have to state exactly what it is. You can't just tell the class to look at the graph or look at the photograph, because they're seeing it, but the blind student isn't. Know the student by name so that you can call the student, get the student attention by calling his or her name. And by doing so, the person will be able to, even in class, to participate better, at the workplace to communicate with you better, right? So the information being projected should be read aloud. So you put up something on the screen and you say, that quotation is from so and so and so, but you have to read the quotation. When using a video, the activity where the activities are not narrated, because you know, look at this video. You're in a psychology class, for example, and they showing a video of the behavior of, say, a person who has schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. Then the person will have certain behavioral patterns that you might just be able to depict in a video. If it's not being narrated what the person is saying, the lecturer should narrate or ask the student to sit by the person who is blind and narrate for them quietly. Keep in mind as the lecturers and as workers, that sometimes persons who are blind tend to be left out. You know, you have an assignment and you ask people to choose a group, they will choose everybody else sometimes because people are still not at the place. We have grown, we have come a long way, but some people are still not at the place that we can do as well as them. And we do perform all our tasks independently and work with groups very well. When collecting cash, repeat the amount you have received. So if you work in the bursary or work in the canteen, wherever, and you are collecting cash, the person hands you a $500, say, okay, this is a 500. They might know, they surely know quite often, but just to make sure that when the change comes back, there isn't any misunderstanding. So you say, this is 500, you have bought something for 150. I'm giving you back $350 change. These are $300 together, and this is the $50. So you give it to us in a way that we can easily arrange it in our purse, in our pockets, or wherever we keep our money. Assist with completing forms. Persons with visual impairment are going to need assistance in that regard, because remember, unless it is on the computer and we can access it or whatever, but once it's a paper-based document, we would need that kind of help. Making contact, introduce yourself, ask the person if they need assistance, you know, and how, because the person might need the assistance in different ways. They might just need somebody to assist them to a point, or just to tell them something. Now we're going to move to correct guiding techniques. Ms. Garson, can you inform me how much time I have left?
Hi, Gloria. You have 10 minutes left.
Okay. All right. So we're going to be looking at some correct guiding techniques, because as you will recall, that was one of our objectives, right? So, and we're going to be showing some pictures All right, since I will not have time to go through it in extreme details, right? If that's such a thing. So for example, you're going to assist walking with a person who is blind. So you're going to be assisting them. So what you will do is stand beside the person and the person will take your hold of your arm just above the elbow, 4 fingers inside and the big finger on the thumb on the outside, right? They will grip your arm, but not grip it in the sense that you will feel pain. Just hold firmly, I should say, right? Keep your arm relaxed and close to your side. Not tight that the person's hand is squeezing up between your body and your arm, but just relax. Remain half a step ahead of the person. And why do we say that? Because if you're walking exactly beside the person, you are going to be you will have to be looking out for the steps when they come up. Because quite often when people are walking with somebody else, especially somebody they trust and somebody who understands, then they might not be using the cane as effectively as they should or not at all. So the reason for you to be a half a step ahead is that any obstacle that comes up, if you don't see it, you will trip over it first. Or if a step comes, you will see the step and you won't have to tell the person to step down because they will feel your body move downward. They will feel your body move upward. So they will know whether to step up or step down. Give brief and clear verbal instructions. Mention appropriate hazards and say if there are steps or curbs coming up. So you're walking with me and you say, okay, Gloria, we have a curb coming up now, or we are going to go up some steps because I might not, if I'm using my cane, I will be able to touch the curb, but sometimes it's good to be prepared for it as well. If you have to leave a person, we mentioned that before, you are guiding at any time, let them know that you're leaving, but this is another part to it. If you're leaving the person, we're walking on a corridor, we're walking into a hall and I have to run for some reason, or, put the person against a wall to stand, or a post, something that they can make contact with if they're going to be waiting for you. Don't just leave them out in the open. There are some people like those of us who are fully rehabilitated and are aware of our environment, who might just say, okay, go on, meet me so-and-so, right? Because you know your way around. But there are those who are newly blind or who don't have the self-confidence as yet. Now let's look at and of course, I'm sure you saw the sighted guiding technique slide. I mean, how you hold the hand, that picture. Now we're going to look at narrow spaces. Of course, in walking with the person who is blind, you may need to walk single file, when moving through crowds or narrow spaces or even between chairs, So what you're gonna do, instead of holding the person's shoulder from behind and pushing them ahead of you and say, all right, go on now, yes, take your time, yeah, go on, all right, stand up there, son, wait for me. No, the person was holding your guiding arm. You just gently swing that guiding arm behind you, say almost in the middle of your spine, but more, a little lower down, almost in the middle of your spine. And you have that arm across your back and the person will slide because they already have your hand on the guiding arm behind you. Keep holding that arm, but instead of above the elbow now, they'll be holding closer to the wrist. And then you walk with the person will walk directly behind you. And when you come from the crowded space, you just simply pull that arm back to your side and the person glides right beside you and you continue. No trouble, you don't feel clumsy or anything. So look at the picture now. That's the narrow spaces that you're looking at walking. So I just quickly say we're going through doors. There's a technique for going through doors, and that one is kind of tricky. But when you get the slide, you can look at it. But there's a picture when you're opening the door, yes? Because the person, you don't need to be using your leg to block the door for the person to come through because the person can manage. So when you have the person on the hinge side of the door, you pull the door open and put the person's hand on the knob and you go ahead through the door, and the person will come through behind you, find the handle on the inside and close the door. Easy. Let's look at steps quickly. All right, so always approach steps straight or stairs straight on. Stop or pause just before you reach the step, or just before you reach the top of the stairs or the bottom of the stairs, so that person can catch their bearings to go up the step, right? Or up a curb, right? Inform the individual if the step is very high or very low. If they're using the cane, they'll be able to find that out. And the thing about it, once they're aware of that, and you should tell them whether the steps are wide enough so that they don't go too much to one side. But if it's stairs, tell the person you're approaching the stairs, and if it is going up or down, because some stairs, based on where you are, you're going down, and others you're going up, right? And both of them you can go up and down too, right? I mean, a staircase, depending on where you're located. So you put the person's free hand on the guiding rail, on the rail, and they will assist themselves up the stairs. Say when you reach the top,
You have 1 minute.
or the bottom of the stairs, and you can look at the picture right there. So the final thing I'm going to deal with is when you're guiding a person to a chair or into a car. So if the person is sitting on a chair, you use your guiding arm, you walk up to the back of the chair and you place that arm on the chair. The person will follow your arm and hold the chair and find their way to sit down, right? If the chair is against the wall or has no back, you walk up to the chair slowly and let the person's leg brush against the chair, and they'll find their way from there. If it's a car, place the person's hand on the car door, because sometimes you try to open the car for them and they're not sure where it is. And some car doors are shaped differently and it can hit the person in the face or stomach or something. So that's what you have to do. So when the person is sitting in a chair, allow the person to sit down unaided and get up unaided, right? Because they're able to manage. Now, when you get the slide, you will see some general tips about, how we feel about ourselves and what you need to recognize our capabilities are, right? And basically it has to do with decision-making, privacy, how the importance of information. So thank you for listening, and there is the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Gloria, and thank you so much for observing the time limit. We will now move into the question and answer segment for your presentation. Just a few comments in the chat. I think 2 of these were directed at Ms. Sharmali Camarera's presentation earlier. One person says presentation at the faculty orientation would be excellent. And another person is saying sensitization during orientation is a comprehensive way to go indeed. Okay, and Mr. Joseph is asking that the recording be available for future reference. So I think that comment is directed at Joshua and Francesco. So we move to anyone in the chat who has any questions, comments, or feedback for Ms. Goff. No questions? Ms. Goff was very clear. Okay, there's a comment. Thank you so very much, Miss Gloria Goff. You brought back memories. I learned a lot about the wheelchair student. And May Esther Robinson says, thank you, Miss Goff, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Lorna Thomas Black says, excellent information, Miss Goff.
Okay. All right, sorry,
Miss
Go ahead,
Moderator,
Shama.
Ms. Gov, very refreshing presentation. You know, sometimes we do take this for granted as persons with disability, but it does reinforce some of these things that we need to take into consideration when dealing with persons with different special needs. So really refreshing presentation. Always refreshing when you get the information over and over again.
Okay, great. All right, so with no further questions or comments, Dr. Morris, we will move to you to give the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Gersner. And I want to, on behalf of the team, to express profound thanks to all who participated in the seminar today. And I want to start by thanking the campus registrar who subsequently came on. I saw him on when I checked the chat, but that time we were in full flight in the presentation. I want to thank very much Ms. Gerson for ably guiding the presentation. Ably guiding the presentations, and you know, you managed the process very well. We had budgeted for 3 hours from 10 to 1, and you managed the time well to the point where we are just about 2 minutes away after 1 o'clock. And I want to thank the presenters, Mrs. Shamali Cardoza Camara, for that excellent presentation on the services offered by the OSSS. Ms. Gloria Goff, who just completed that refreshing presentation. And I know that she was just getting in her elements to go further. But you know, time is always a constraint in these seminars. Then we have to thank Professor Marco Schiffer for getting through today finally and to make the presentation. And you know, Marcus is in Switzerland, and that Switzerland is like 7 hours ahead of Jamaica. So they are now at 8 o'clock. And for him to come on and present at the time that he did was really a tremendous sacrifice. And we want to commend him for his excellent presentation. Thanks to all the lecturers and administrators who registered and participated. And please remember, look out for the other sessions that we are going to be having, because we want you to complete the 6 hours of participation in the seminar so you can get a certificate of completion. And I have to big up, I say, my little Bonono's friend, Lana Thomas Black on the thing. So I have to big her up, is my bona fide friend for years. And I want to thank Mrs. Francesca Lloyd McDavid and also Joshua Bell for giving technical support and tremendous guidance in this whole process. Francesca has been really tremendous in terms of her support, you know. And I also have to thank Shavane and Jason, who are research assistants at the Center for Disability Studies. And they have come on and they have participated and asked some very good questions. And we want to thank them for their tremendous support. Thanks to the Faculty of Social Sciences for their continued support for the UWI Center for Disability Studies. And we can only get better and stronger. Individuals have been asking about the recording. Francesca, you indicated that for staff only, we have a YouTube access. Can you,
Yes,
you want to elaborate on that?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, so we will upload the recordings to our Faculty of Social Sciences staff YouTube page, and then we will circulate the link via Mona messaging to everyone to access.
Okay, great. Yes, so all of those refreshing information that have been provided, you can access, all right? We thank you very much, and we look forward to having the next seminar with you, and you will be duly notified for that, all right? Thank you very much.